How did a promise of paradise lead to one of the deadliest tragedies in history? On November 18, 1978, over 900 lives were lost in a remote jungle settlement in Guyana, in an event that would go down in history as the Jonestown Massacre. This horrific incident remains one of the most infamous cult tragedies of all time, raising questions about the power of manipulation, the dangers of blind loyalty, and the darker aspects of human psychology. It's a story that's both fascinating and terrifying, with a cast of characters that includes a charismatic cult leader, brainwashed followers, and a tangled web of politics, social activism, and religious fervor. So, what led to this catastrophic event? In this video, we'll delve into the shocking story of Jonestown, exploring the key challenges that led to the tragedy and the harrowing details of that fateful day. In the years leading up to the massacre, the People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, had gained a reputation as a radical left-wing organization that promised a utopian community to its followers. But beneath the surface, a sinister game of psychological manipulation was unfolding, with Jones using a combination of charm, fear, and coercion to control his followers. As we explore the events leading up to the tragedy, it becomes clear that Jones's influence was far more insidious than anyone could have imagined. The key challenge facing the followers of the People's Temple was their unquestioning loyalty to Jones, who presented himself as a visionary leader and a messianic figure. Jones's message of social justice, racial equality, and communal living resonated deeply with many disaffected Americans in the 1970s, who were disillusioned with mainstream politics and seeking an alternative. However, as Jones's power grew, so did his paranoia and megalomania. He began to demand absolute obedience from his followers, using tactics such as public humiliation, physical punishment, and emotional blackmail to maintain control. Those who dared to question his authority or leave the movement were subject to brutal treatment, and eventually, even murder. Jones's grip on his followers was further tightened by his clever use of propaganda and misinformation. He created a sense of urgency and crisis, convincing his followers that the outside world was hostile and that the only safe haven was the People's Temple. He even staged fake healings and miraculous events to reinforce his divine status, further entrapping his followers in a web of deceit. As the temple's popularity grew, so did its influence and reach. Jones began to build alliances with prominent politicians and social activists, who were either unaware or willing to overlook his increasingly erratic behavior. It was during this period that Jones's anti-establishment rhetoric and apocalyptic visions began to take on a more fanatical tone, warning his followers of an impending catastrophe that only he could save them from. Against this backdrop of rising tensions and paranoia, Jones's followers became increasingly isolated from the outside world. They were forced to work long hours in the jungle, building a self-sufficient community that would ostensibly protect them from the coming apocalypse. But as conditions deteriorated, and rumors of abuse and mistreatment began to surface, it became clear that Jonestown was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. In the next section, we'll delve deeper into the background of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, exploring the events that led to the fateful day in Jonestown. From Jones's rise to power to the social and political climate of the time, we'll examine the complex web of factors that contributed to this tragedy. The People's Temple was originally founded in the 1950s as a Christian church with a strong social justice agenda. Jones, a charismatic preacher from Indiana, had built a reputation as a passionate advocate for racial equality and social change. However, as the years went by, Jones's message became increasingly apocalyptic and authoritarian, with him presenting himself as the only one who could save humanity from an impending catastrophe. Jones's rise to power was facilitated by his ability to appeal to disaffected Americans who felt disillusioned with mainstream politics and society. He cleverly tapped into the zeitgeist of the 1960s and 1970s, using the language of social justice and activism to recruit followers from the counterculture movement. Many of these followers were young, idealistic, and seeking a sense of purpose and community, making them vulnerable to Jones's charismatic leadership and apocalyptic visions. As Jones's influence grew, so did his megalomania. He began to see himself as a messianic figure, destined to lead humanity to a utopian paradise. This vision was reinforced by his growing sense of paranoia, with Jones becoming increasingly obsessed with the idea that the government, the media, and other external forces were conspiring against him. Against this backdrop of rising tensions and paranoia, Jones's followers became increasingly isolated from the outside world. They were forced to work long hours in the jungle, building a self-sufficient community that would ostensibly protect them from the coming apocalypse. But as conditions deteriorated, and rumors of abuse and mistreatment began to surface, it became clear that Jonestown was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The social and political climate of the time played a significant role in the rise of the People's Temple. The 1970s were a time of great social change and upheaval, with many Americans seeking alternative forms of spirituality and community. The temple's message of social justice and communal living resonated deeply with many disaffected Americans, who saw it as a refuge from the chaos and uncertainty of the outside world. However, as the years went by, the temple's message became increasingly radical and authoritarian. Jones began to use his followers as a private army, forcing them to work long hours in the jungle and subjecting them to physical and emotional abuse. The outside world was seen as a threat, and anyone who dared to question Jones's authority was branded a traitor. In the years leading up to the massacre, the People's Temple had become a powder keg of tensions, with Jones's followers increasingly isolated and radicalized. The writing was on the wall, but it would take a tragic event to awaken the world to the horrors that were unfolding in the jungle. In the next section, we'll explore the harrowing details of the final day in Jonestown, including the moments leading up to the mass suicide and the chilling methods used. On that fateful day, November 18, 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan, who had been investigating the People's Temple, arrived in Jonestown with a team of journalists and defectors. Jones, sensing that his power was about to be exposed, made a desperate bid to maintain control by orchestrating a massacre. The events that followed were nothing short of horrific. Jones, using a combination of coercion, persuasion, and deception, convinced his followers to participate in a mass suicide. The method of choice was a lethal cocktail of potassium cyanide and flavor aid, which was distributed to the crowd with devastating consequences. As the followers began to die, Jones's loyalists were forced to kill those who refused to comply, using guns, knives, and even their bare hands to silence any opposition. The result was a scene of unimaginable horror, with over 900 bodies strewn across the jungle floor. The aftermath of the massacre was equally disturbing. The world was left to grapple with the sheer scale of the tragedy and the extent of Jones's manipulation and control. The incident raised profound questions about the nature of humanity, the power of manipulation, and the dangers of blind loyalty. In conclusion, the Jonestown Massacre is a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the darker aspects of human psychology. As we reflect on this tragedy, we're forced to confront the fact that even the most well-intentioned individuals can be led astray by charismatic leaders and apocalyptic visions. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this tragic event in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical content, and check out our other video on cults and tragic historical events.